see how he does.
Novichenko. I believe his wife and coach with him. From Men with Swords of Russia.
Men with Swords, Moscow, Russia. Dennis,
Ladies and gentlemen, we now come to the final fight of the evening. For gold in the Open Longsword. In the blue corner, from KHFS Sweden, Dennis Ljungqvist.
That's a Viking if ever I saw one.
the veteran versus the newcomer.
And in the red corner, from Men with Swords, Russia, Ivan Novichenko.
The old stalwart versus the newcomer.
Look at that laser focus in his eyes.
Fencers shake hands. Shake hands with the ref.
And you can't hesitate for a second standing in front of Novichenko. If you stand and rest in
He'll
open
get
field
you.
in front of you, he'll get you.
And watch out for your low lines. Remember what he did in the other weapon set. It's those blows at the low line. He will do the same thing here.
Here we go, round one. We'll see what Dennis will attempt to do here.
Fencers circling one another. Both in flug. From Tag on the shoulder by Ljungqvist. Feint by Novichenko.
So he's testing Dennis' reactions now.
Ljungqvist will have nothing of it.
What he's looking for is Dennis' natural reaction. What is
One-handed blow by Novichenko.
no quality call? They keep going. Thrust by Dennis. Novichenko parries. But did he parry in time? Here we see it in replay. Boom, hot exchange to see.
Looks like a light hit by Novichenko for 2 points.
Strike low by Novichenko. Parries with one hand. Strikes Dennis to the ribs with one hand. Spins round and parries over the back of his head. Wow.
2 points for Novichenko. Very quickly, we have a 4-point lead for Novichenko.
Being scolded there by the ref for sure for
Turning his
back. I'd love to see a replay of that. Novichenko in flug. And this goes down.
The Vexel.
Vexel. From top. Intense. So they're setting each other up with a distance here.
Yeah, but the distance.
Strike low by Novichenko. Dennis not having a second of that. Goes straight for the head. 3 points for Dennis. And 2 points for Novichenko's strike to the leg there.
It's a 1-point differential leading to 1-4. But Dennis is...
One-handed blow. Dennis comes chasing in. Somebody called point. One judge saw something. Yep. Yeah. 3 points for Novichenko. Oh, sorry, was that Dennis that got that point?
Yes.
Swipe by Dennis. Attempted thrust. Yeah, south the best. just slides away from that tip.
Yeah, and he spun offline. It was very nice. Dennis is starting to close in. He needs to press the attack. Staying at range, staying at distance with Novichenko is a bad idea.
Strike with one.
One-handed blow by Novichenko, response to the low line. Ljungqvist.
But it's not only that he can strike with one hand, he can parry with one hand.
That's true.
Usually you see guys, they lose control of the sword when they strike with one hand. But that control. Novichenko out of bounds. Novichenko out of bounds, but struck Dennis first. Let's see what the judges say. 1 point each.
Equal exchange.
Novichenko in a clear lead.
It's really interesting
Clearly.
because Novichenko is one of these guys. He fences longsword, and honestly, he uses it one-handed as much as he does two.
When he races his sword in the air like he's already won.
All right, our break is over. The fencers engage again. Ljungqvist needs to do something different.
Wow, Ljungqvist is smart and he's going to do something different. Look like out of bounds. Dennis forced Novichenko out. I believe it's a hot angle. Yep. 2 points to Dennis for that.
3-6. He's going to need something else, but one blow to the head, unanswered.
Both fences taking 4 there. Look like double to the head. But only Novichenko got the head hit there. We see that in replay. Judges call that 3 points to Novichenko, 2 to Dennis.
1 point differential for Novichenko. Oh, yeah, there we have it. Blow to the leg, and it looked like a blow to the head by Ljungqvist. Judges see it as a
it was on the arm.
exchange.
Crossed by Dennis.
And drives him out of the
So
ring.
that's Dennis' tactic in the second round, is just to apply pressure on Novichenko. Just get him out of the ring.
Dennis slowly creeping up in the points, but can he reach parity in time?
He can. It's only 3 points. One clear strike to the head.
It's true. But the problem is, so far, he hasn't been able to get any really clear hits on Novichenko. Novichenko is a tough competitor. Oh, but I think there was an after blow.
Yeah, to the leg, to the chin. The judges didn't call that. They might have seen it as too far off to the tempo.
Yeah. Even score now, 6-6. Can Ljungqvist pull this one out?
See, this is where a seasoned veteran like Dennis comes forward, right? When
Right.
deep troubled waters. This is when they
They
have
pull
the
it.
skill set and the tools to figure stuff out.
Oh, but we see one of these height changes, one of these level changes by Novichenko.
Here it comes again on the replay.
Where he goes underneath.
Boom! Straight on the groin of Dennis, who hits the ground. Rough cut.
And they called that equal. Blow to the leg, blow to the high lines by Ljungqvist. But they
Looks
call
like
it
it
equal
landed on the-
exchange. I think it landed on the
shoulder
arms.
or the arm, upper arm. That's the end of the second round. And we're at sudden death. Here is Swordfish 2017. Dennis and Flug. Sorry, Alba.
The tension, the suspense as they circle each other, knowing that
You can cut
here it
through
is.
the
And
air with that butter knife right now.
body blow and a blow to the head by Ljungqvist. That should be 3-2, I believe.
But only Novichenko got the head hit there. We see that.